Hello everyone, thanks for joining for another restorative practice. This week we're working with the theme of freedom, and while I do have a strong preference for the very beginning of the Yoga Sutras because it does imply a lot of fundamentals for yoga philosophy, today we're going to take a little switch and go to the very final sutra of the 4 books of the Yoga Sutras. So this is Yoga Sutra 4.34, and this has to do with freedom in how we describe what freedom is. We talk about that as a goal of quite a lot of spiritual practices and religious practices and things like this: salvation, freedom, liberation, enlightenment, things like that. So let's kind of talk a little bit about what that means. So I have 2 different versions of Yoga Sutra 4.34. The first one here is by Barbara Stoller Miller. Her version says, "Freedom is a reversal of the evolution of the cause of material things, which are empty of meaning for the spirit. It is also the power of consciousness in a state of true identity." So you might recognize that little phrase, true identity, in Sanskrit, and in yoga environments we call that Sat Nam, true name or true identity. The second version of this same sutra comes from Chip Hartranft, which is one of my new favorite versions of the Yoga Sutras, one of my new favorite translations. He says, "Freedom is at hand when the fundamental qualities of nature are recognized as irrelevant to pure awareness, which stands alone in its very nature, the power of pure seeing." There's a couple little phrases in there that I want to unpack. He talks about the fundamental qualities of nature. A more yogic way or a Sanskrit way of saying that is the gunas, which are the 3 forms of this world. We have tamasic energy, which is very slow and stable, and we have ragistic energy, which is very dynamic and energetic. And then we have the third quality of nature, which is the one we're always striving for, which is called sattva, which is balance between this high energy and low energy, between stability and flexibility, which we also see represented in the yogic concept of sthira sukham asanam. That posture should be steady and comfortable, or should be solid and flexible. So what we're going to try to do is a couple of little warm-up exercises to kind of embody these 3 qualities of nature. And then ideally what we're going to try to do as we find stillness and as we move into our observation mode is to transcend these constantly changing qualities of nature, to embody that full witnessing, which is talked about here in these 2 versions of this sutra as pure awareness, as the power of pure consciousness. And what do we mean by pure here, pure consciousness or pure awareness? What could it be, sort of infiltrated by, or what would make it impure? And the answer to that is our individual identity, our small s self ego, our opinions, our identities that are transitory and temporary. Those fall into the categories of the gunas. Our mindsets, our feelings, the condition of our body, all of those things are part of that fundamental qualities of nature, that ever-changing flow between too much energy, not enough energy, all of this as we try to move into sattva of balance. So rather than being tainted by sort of this individualistic thinking, pure awareness is when we allow all perception in, and we have no opinions about how we reflect that back out into the world. So let's start with our warm-up exercises, and then from there we'll begin to work into our stillness poses for restorative practice. You can see behind me I have a couple of props set behind me. I have a green bolster, I have a couple of blankets, and a couple of blocks. If you do not have those things, a couple of bed pillows substitute very nicely for the bolster. Blankets can also be substituted for towels. We might need 2 or 3 of those, so if you want to grab those things. If you don't have blocks, some firm cushions or even some additional folded blankets or towels can work in place of your blocks. So if you want to gather up your things, let's get started. So our warm-up exercises that we're going to begin with, we're going to try to embody a little bit of the high energy. We'll start with that first so that we can slowly kind of work our way towards stillness. Tamasic energy, if you remember, is sort of more of that slow moving. It's almost like slow motion. It's thick, it's solid, it's a very stable form. The opposite of that is our registic energy, which is high energy. It's constantly dynamically changing. It's always in a state of flow and flux. It's excitable. It's alive. So we're going to begin with that so we can work our way into stillness in our restorative poses. First, let's try to embody that sattvic quality, that third quality of nature, which is balance. So in the low half of the body in our seated position, let's feel a sense of heaviness. Let's try to bring in a sense of stability, stillness, heaviness, solidness as the low body sinks into the floor. Just to introduce a little bit of dynamism, kind of shift your ribs around on your spine, maybe gently lift and lower the chin, kind of work the shoulders around a little bit, and see if you can find a place where the heart feels like it's hovering right over the sort of bowl of the pelvis, and the crown of the head is hovering right over the heart. So we have this nice long line of energy in the body. Hands can rest anywhere that's comfortable. And in this sattvic place where we have sort of a lightness of being in the upper body, and we feel the sensations of breath and the heartbeat in the upper body, that movement, and we're feeling that stability in the lower body. When we take those two qualities together, we find that balance of sattva. Let's begin to increase the amount of movement and sensation that we feel by deepening the breath. Maybe begin to breathe both a little deeper, longer inhales and sort of more forceful exhales, but also being a little bit more quick about the breath. So faster, deeper inhales, faster, more forceful exhales. Keeping that breath pattern going, not to hyperventilate, just a little bit deeper and more fast breath. We're going to start to bring a little bit more movement into the body. So as you inhale, start to lift your heart and your chin, pulling the shoulders back. As you exhale, chin to chest, shoulders forward. Kind of getting a little bellows action in the diaphragm as we stoke up that energy. Maybe 2 more breaths like that. And coming back into our sattvic balance. Notice more aliveness, more sensation in the upper body. Maybe the heart's beating a little bit faster. Maybe our breath is just now starting to return to a more slower and natural pace. So that's sort of our registic energy in a restorative format. It's sort of heavier and faster breathing. Let's start to embody more of that tamasic energy without getting quite into stillness. So to do this, we're going to do some barrel rolling in the chest. So it's almost as if we've got kind of our crown of head, heart center, and tailbone aligned in that tall format. And what we're going to do is imagine the heart sort of rotating around this central channel. So we can come into sort of a cow shape and then to one side, back behind, and forward. But we're going to do this exceptionally slowly, remembering that we're working our way from that high energy, registic energy, into this more tamasic energy before we try to find our sattvic balance in our stillness. So take several rotations in one direction. The more slowly you move, the more aware you can become of how the neck, the shoulders, the hips, and the ribs are moving in this shape. And after a few more rotations, just kind of pause in the center for a moment, take a big breath in to clear, and out. Then reverse your direction. So again, moving in very slow motion. Perhaps you can feel the hips getting involved, the shoulders getting involved. And again, the more slowly we move, the more we can pay attention or heighten our awareness of what's going on. And of course, our fundamental point of this practice tonight is to come into or try to approximate that pure awareness. So the more detailed our awareness can become, the closer we're getting to that pure awareness. Another rotation or two here. And again, we'll pause in that centrally aligned place, sort of active through the upper body, heavy and grounded through the lower body. Coming back into that place of pure awareness. There's no action here. You can observe both the heaviness and stillness in the low body, and the heartbeat and the movements of breath and mind in the upper body. We'll start to move into our first restorative pose. And for this, we'll use some of our props. If you have your bolster or your bed pillow substitute, we're going to come to sitting on the heels first. And if you notice sitting back on your heels is not comfortable for your body, let's first begin by bringing in some padding for the heels or the ankles. So some folded, narrow blankets, kind of in this format, or possibly even rolled, can work really well to place either underneath the front of your ankle so that your feet are kind of on top and not quite so flat to the earth. You have a little bit more of an angle. That's one place where a blanket or some padding might be comfortable. A second place where you can use some kind of support, again, folded blanket, perhaps we tri-fold it for a little bit more height or something like that, can be placed on top of your calf muscles around the heels. And this allows you to sit back without so much compression on your feet. Another way to do this is to place a block between and then perhaps pad that block with a layer or two of blanket. This gives you a little bit more height. Again, if you have sensitive knees or ankles, that can be really helpful. You can come from here into a child's pose that is very low. This offers a little bit more rounding to the spine. You could also place a second block or again a stack of folded blankets or cushions underneath the forehead. And this offers quite a lot of space down here underneath the body. Another way to provide some support to that part of the body could be your bolster or bolster substitute. And in this case, you can either turn one cheek down or the other. You could also, again, apply a folded blanket or some kind of softer cushion or a block here to support your forehead. So there's lots of different options on how you could do this, lots of ways to experiment depending on your height and the shape of your body, finding a position that's comfortable. Arms can be along either side of your support. They can also kind of come palms up, elbows coming closer to the thighs, kind of reaching down towards the lower half of the body. Alternatively, you can also place them stacked on top of your support and rest your forehead on that area as well. That gives you a little bit more room for your nose and mouth so you can still breathe with your face down. Now, ideally here, we're looking for a sense of deep stillness, almost reimagining that lower half of the body. In this case, it's all the parts of the body that are touching support below you. Recreating that to be just like we were in our seated position, so heavy, relaxed, effortless, stable, still. And in the upper half of the body, in this case, sort of the back of the head, the spine, maybe the back of the sacrum. We want to feel more of that breath movement, heartbeat movement, a dynamism. So we feel both the steadiness and stillness as well as the action of the breath. Perhaps the mind is also moving here. And what we want to do is be able to observe any flow of thoughts the same way we would observe the breath. We don't try to make the breath completely still. Obviously, that's a bad idea. But coming into a place of pure awareness about it. So as we observe the breath without judgment, we're trying also to slip into that state of pure awareness where we can observe the flow of thoughts and perceptions just as detachedly as we observe the breath. Child's pose is excellent for sort of that inward experience, that ability to observe and slip into that pure perception as we observe the self. You might also notice any ambient sounds or perceptions coming from outside the body. We are about halfway through our hold of this pose, so if you have one cheek down, this might be a good time to turn to the other side. Simply observe the breath. Observe sensations both within and outside the body. Observe the thoughts. So if you can observe maybe your heartbeat or any pulse points that might be happening, any strong sensations that might be happening in the body. So if you can sink a little deeper into your support, drawing on that tamasic energy, which is heavy, stable, and restful. And also feeling the motion of the upper body and the belly as you breathe, the heartbeat, and the flow of thoughts, that more registic energy. And seeing if you can apply your pure awareness, your attentiveness, your observation and witnessing to the balancing of those two forces. Perhaps we can also balance the perception of both inward and external sensations. Take another 7 to 10 breaths in this shape. Maybe in preparation for movement, we begin to deepen those breaths again or come into those shorter but more deep breaths. And perhaps adjusting the position of your hands to bring them underneath your shoulders. And nice and slow with that attentiveness, press into the floor in a tamasic way. As your arms straighten and you're kind of lifting up and away from your support, drop your chin in towards your chest. Be active about lifting the back of the heart, sort of exaggerating that roundness of the spine. Take a few breaths like this, engaging and committing to that internal observation for the rest of our practice today. And then rising more fully upright, we're going to start to transition into our next shape. So if you have your support in front of you, we're going to actually turn that support to a perpendicular shape. So it's a little bit more narrow in front of us. We might use a set of blocks or again some of those extra cushions or blankets. We're going to set that up above or on top I've got quite a lot of props underneath my body, so I'm going to move so I can gather some of those things up. And we'll just come to sitting facing one of the longer edges of our mat. So that means one hip is up against the long edge of the bolster. And we're going to kind of take two different positions in one here. We're going to start in a sort of side lying position that allows either side of the body to open. And we're going to sort of, again, focus on observing the balance between compression and opening. And we'll do this on both sides. And we'll transition from this side lying shape into an open twist. So what we're going to try to do is, I'll show you this from behind my body so you can kind of see this a little bit better. So I have one hip up against the longer edge of the bolster. I'm going to kind of scoot some of this support a little further this direction. So you can see it's a little asymmetrical. And I'm first going to just start with my feet in front of me, which I realize you now cannot see. I'm going to let both knees kind of fall to one side. So this is almost like a deer twist. If you find that's not comfortable for the body, you can experiment with other positions for your feet or use some kind of support between. And while I'm upright and seated, I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of leaning from side to side, opening and stretching the sides of the rib cage a little bit. And then eventually I'm going to come into a position where the side of my ribs that's closest to my support is underneath my ribs. This little block area or whatever props you're using here can be good for supporting the head. You can play with different heights for this. I like a little bit of side stretch in my neck as well. So I'm just going to adjust my props until I feel a little bit of that. If you're only using one block or you have some additional support available, you can place that a little further. Once you're in your side lying position, you can kind of see my bottom arm is in that space between my head support and my rib support. Your top arm can rest along the top of the body. It can rest in front of you on your support or on the floor. Or again, if you have another set of support, you can use your block here to place your hand. It can be closer or further from the body. You can also do that without this block and just allow the elbow to kind of bend and the hands to rest on the floor. So take a few rounds of breath here. Being a little bit more active on your exhales for these first few breaths. As you exhale, kind of squeezing that bottom shoulder and bottom hip together around your rib support. You might also experiment during these first few breaths with different positions for your top arm to find the one that's going to work best for you for this shape. Then slip into a more effortless breath, just kind of allowing your breath to flow naturally. Feel the sort of polarized separation between the very, very open top side of your ribs and the more squeezed and compressed bottom side of your ribs. See if you can find the place in the center of the body where that shifts. Of course, we can't really do that because both are existing within us at the same time. That opening and that compression are happening. And this is how we begin to observe or practice witnessing those conditional states of being. Now, what does all of this have to do with freedom, you might be asking? Freedom is defined in that last sutra as sort of a transcending of these conditional qualities. Your mind is subject to the gunas, these qualities. The world is subject to these qualities. Your emotional state, your physical state of being, all of these things are subject to this ever-changing conditionality of these qualities, these three qualities of nature. The idea is to come into such a state of pure awareness, pure perception, that we are no longer affected by these changing states of being, but instead simply observing each of these states in fluctuation with no opinion, without letting the internal core of who we are be affected by it. Sometimes we're happy. Sometimes we're sad. Sometimes we're hungry. Sometimes we're satisfied.
Sometimes we're tired, sometimes we're energetic. Can you be the same person within, at the very essential core of who you are, in all of those circumstances? Can you be free of the conditions? One more big breath in here, especially paying attention to opening up that top side of your ribs. Then wherever your top arm is, we're going to begin to bring it to roll open to the side. And this is why we left this much space behind us on our support, so that this top arm can come and rest here. Again, we do have some other props available to us if you would like some support, again, for your hand or arm. This can be useful for the block. So the knees are still facing the same direction. The bottom side of your ribs is now kind of facing outward. I need to make a little adjustment here also to my head support. But now my nose and my knees are facing opposite directions. We might even turn the head gently side to side to find a place to pause. And this is us opening up to the things we normally ignore, becoming more aware, coming more into that pure perception where we let all sensations in. We ignore nothing. We leave nothing out of our awareness. We reject nothing. Even when things are quote unquote bad or negative or challenging, we invite our awareness to observe these qualities, but we remain essentially ourselves, the very core of who we are, unaffected by these conditions. That is freedom. That is liberation. That is the state of yoga. You might find as you move into this twist or as you hold it longer, some little adjustments could be made to make the pose more sustainable for you. Feel free to make those adjustments as needed. Now, to come out of this shape, rather than moving our upper body, we're going to actually bring the lower body into movement. So feel free to use any support or hands that you might need to help yourself adjust. Knees are actually going to come upright. You might lift the body up momentarily. And we're going to come into a heart-opening shape. So one thing that I need to do is kind of move my head support a little bit. I'm going to just gently lift up my chest and place it a little bit more firmly on my support underneath my ribs. Arms can come kind of above the top, so we're still kind of in that little channel. And then we have lots of choices about our feet. The knees can be together, the knees can be wide, the legs can be long and extended and straight. They can also remain bent at the knees. Knees might even fall toward one another to help us relax the legs. But now feel the more balanced sattvic nature. It's much less asymmetrical than our first two poses, that sort of sideline shape, and then our open twist. Take a few deep breaths to, as you exhale, let your body sink a little deeper into your support. You might also find that by adjusting the height of your head support, or whether or not you're using this head support, you can open the throat center a little bit more as well. This is again sort of symbolic of if we imagine the heart as our essential nature, then we are lifting that part of us up. Ideally, this is sort of like the highest point, is the heart center. We're in that action of transcending or rising above the qualities of the gunas, the changing forms of ourselves, the changing forms of this world. Feel steadiness in your sacrum, steadiness in the parts of your body that are supported by props or the floor. the dynamic balancing Rajas energy that is our breath, the place where our attention is going, ideally that is ever expanding. And we're not only sensing the perceptions that are available to us from within the body, like the breath and the heartbeat and the mind, but also noticing any sounds or ambient sensations around us. Opening up to receive all of that into our awareness. So pure awareness means that it is not limited by our individual identity, our individual temporary condition of being. Freedom means it is unlimited. That is a word that we really love in our culture, but we don't have a lot of ways of accessing that outside of like a cell phone data plan or an internet plan or something like that. We think of unlimited, we think of how much can we get for very little. And in the yogic sensations, when we talk about unlimited, we really, really mean unlimited. Unlimited potential, unlimited creativity, unlimited connection. So if you can tap into that by opening your heart and then sinking into or trusting that support that's below you. Take a few more breaths, allowing your breath to help you both lift and transcend, and also settle into the essential nature of who you are. That unlimited being that is your Satnam, your true identity. We'll take just a little brief counter pose before we find our side lying shape and our twist on the other side. So slowly start to gather up your hands, maybe wrapping hands around the body, kind of giving yourself a hug, each hand maybe reaching toward the opposite shoulder. You might just gently pull up on the shoulder blades or kind of lift the elbows away from the heart. Then with this sort of hug going on, we're going to roll to the opposite side now. We might have to come up to seated to adjust our bodies properly on our supports. So again, head support might come a little further to this side of your mat. We might take kind of the deer twist shape in the legs. Perhaps we're using support for that, perhaps not. Take a little, maybe if you're already upright, a little stretch to either side, optional. If you're already on your side, feel free to just kind of stretch from where you are. And again, we'll find sort of that side-lying shape with the bottom arm down in that little channel. Feel free to play with the height of your head support to see what's going to work best for you. Lots of options. And again, once we're in that shape, finding what we'd like to do with our top arm, which can rest alongside the body. It can rest in front of us on our support, rest on the floor. It can also reach up and overhead with or without some kind of additional support for your arm. So lots of variations available. Take a few deep breaths in and out to expand the top side of your ribs and to kind of squeeze a little bit for these first few breaths, the bottom side of the ribs to kind of really find the form of that support that's below you. Noticing the expansion on the upper side of the ribs and the compression at the lower side of the ribs. Just kind of notice where in the body those two opposite things are meeting. And of course we find that there's no line for that. We start to see how even opposites sort of blur into oneness when we try to decide where the dividing line is between them.
And this year has been one of divisiveness and a lot of polarization in a lot of different categories in our external world, which is, of course, subject to those changing conditions. It's helpful to remember that the line between those things can sometimes blur, and when we begin to see with pure perception that is not sort of filtered by our own opinion or our identity, we start to see the oneness of all things, including polarized opposites. So here we sort of have the opposites within ourselves that we're seeing the unity of. And in order to move into more pure perception, we're going to start to open up that point of view a little bit by moving into that open-hearted twist. So that top arm, wherever it's landed in your pose, we'll begin to move that into our shape where we're able to open out wide. Now, as I'm turning my head, I'm realizing that I'm about to lose my support from my head. So I'm just going to gently lift my head, scoot my support a little over to that side, and then open my arm out. And I am finding that I also need to make a little bit of adjustment so that I feel supported. I really liked that little extra block on this side to support the wrist or the very bottom of my arm. Also use the back of your hand this way. I'm just going to give my head a gentle turn from side to side and allow my heart to open to take more in, opening up my perception so that nothing is excluded from my awareness. Freedom lies in not being limited, restricted, or restrained in any way. So the more we can open ourselves up to perceiving all that is available, the more clearly we begin to see things and ourselves. The more open we can be to allowing everything to pass through us, the less affected we are by the changes that we observe. The more rooted we can be in our true nature, our pure perception, our state of yoga, our own wholeness, our completeness. We're about halfway through our twisted hold here. Take a few more micro adjustments to make this pose more sustainable for yourself. Maybe adjust your support or your position a little bit. Settle in. Let go of effort. Feel the stillness and heaviness in the bottom half of the body, the openness and expansive nature of the top half of the body. Feel the knees and nose pointing in opposite directions, a sort of more polarized existence, and feel the very center of your being, spine, still aligned, still true to itself, even as it observes in all directions, open to more perception, pure awareness. Wholeness is freedom because it means you lack nothing. Openness is freedom because it means nothing is restricted from you. Connection to all things is freedom because it means there's nothing that we have to avoid and nothing that is separate from us. Let yourself be as open as you can be. Let your perception be as broad as it can be.
when it's time to come out. Just as we did before, rather than returning back to our sides, we're going to adjust our bodies so that we're coming back into that open heart shape. So the knees are going to start to move more centered and upward. We might lift and lower our body a little bit, making adjustments to our head support if we're using it. And just allowing the arms again to be both now over the top of your support, choosing a position for your legs that is most comfortable for your body. Maybe we choose a slightly different leg position than we chose for this last time. Now we're more symmetrical. There's less of that polarizing, sort of opposite or opposing experience happening in the body, which allows us to be a little bit more open, a little more whole, a little more trusting and relaxed into our support, a little more open and perceiving and a broader range. Take several more breaths in this pose. Feel yourself grounding through the whole back body into that support. This is us settling into our true nature and our true identity as who we are. Feel the upper body more expansive, more dynamic with your breath. More movement. Broadening our perception, opening up to every experience. Being fully present, lacking nothing, opening up to both receive and experience more fully. Tapping into that freedom. So the way that we find this freedom, the way we transcend these conditional qualities is to settle more deeply into our Satnam, into our true nature, into our true essence, and to open up our perception to receive everything with equality, letting go of our opinions and our judgments of what is, and simply experiencing them more fully, opening up to each experience. Take several more breaths here. And when the time comes to come out of this shape, again, we might take that little counter pose with the arms wrapping around maybe the opposite way as we did before, each hand kind of reaching for its opposite shoulder, maybe a little pull upward, pulling the elbows away from heart to kind of lift up the back of the body a little bit. And maybe coming into a shape where the knees are bent, the soles of the feet are on the floor. We might use the hands to support the low back and just tuck the chin in towards the chest and rise. We can also bring the hands to support the back of the head or neck as we roll back up out of our shape. You can also turn to one side and roll up and out of your shape. And from here, we're going to come into our resting pose. And so with all the props that we have available, certainly if you have a pose in mind that you would like to take, feel free to move into that position. I would recommend a legs up the wall. If you have a wall available to you, you can also kind of legs on the couch where the calf muscles are kind of resting either on a bed, where the calf muscles are either resting like on a bed or on a couch and the rest of your body is flat on the floor. Find a position that allows you to be very stable and sinking into that stillness so you can settle into that true nature. And maybe even if your back is lying flat on the floor, there's just a little lift as we tuck the shoulder blades a little under the spine to lift and open the heart a little bit, allowing us to remain open, allowing us to have that full perception and awareness. So take your time sorting through your props and what's going to bring you into the most comfortable position for your resting pose. Settling deeply into that stillness. We trust and begin to take the shape and the stability of that support below us. Begin to merge with that stability, that steadiness, that stillness, that tamasic energy of rest and stability and stillness. Maintaining our connection with that wide open possibility of all the space around the front half or the top half of the body. We feel the movements of breath. We sense and observe the movements of the mind, the beating heart and the circulation of blood, just like the circulation of all these different forms of rajasic and tamasic energy, and always kind of aiming for that central balance of these two other qualities, aiming for that harmonious balance of sattva. This sattvic state is representative of the state of yoga, that ability to transcend these changing conditions of our bodies, our minds, and the world around us, staying stable and harmonized with that inner true self.
Yajnaye
Remain in that state of pure awareness to the best of your ability. Let every sensation in without judging it as positive or negative or helpful or distracting. Just simply observe everything that you can, internally, externally, present, aware, open, and settled into that state of wholeness, freedom, the state of yoga. Remaining in that mode of pure perception. Staying in a state of inner stillness where the essence of our being is unchanging. Begin to find small movements in the body, making a very gradual transition from this stillness into movement. Start with your fingers, your toes, and your head. Gradually allowing this movement to move into the legs and arms. Maybe even in your shape, you can begin to work the spine a little bit, a little lift and lowering of the heart center, movements of the shoulders. Staying in that place of inner stillness and inner awareness as your body moves, taking your time to either stretch out or coil up or find your way from your stillness and rest pose slowly back into your upright seat. Just as we did at the beginning of class, allow that lower half of the body to be tamasic in nature, heavy, stable, still, anchored, grounded. And then allow the upper half of the body to take on those rajastic qualities of aliveness, expansiveness, fluidity as your breath moves and your heart beats and your mind is alert and sharp and observing. And again, see if you can find that place that you won't find, of course, where those two polarized opposite things join inside the self. Very softly bring each palm to touch the other, imagining this unity between polarized opposites, imagining wholeness that includes all and everything, and allowing our awareness to be so broad and so open and inclusive that we can see all of these things, and being so anchored in our true nature and our true essence that we can observe all of these things without our inner essence being changed. Pull that unity into your heart. Drop the chin to the chest to find that observation mode of looking inward, observing that wholeness, recognizing it, and committing to it. As we find our own freedom from the conditions of the gunas, whether in ourselves or in the external world, we become a steady and stable support not only to our own lives, but to the lives of all with whom we interact. So our practice then is one of service to all and to the wholeness that we are. Lokha samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings be happy, healthy, safe, and free. Namaste.